Hello, everybody, and welcome to the New York Giants podcast from Roundtable. I am Matthew Schmidt. This is Dylan Feltovich, and Dylan, it would be better if we had this under more positive circumstances today after this Giants lost to the Broncos, but we do not. He had 33 points in the fourth quarter and a 33-32 loss. They had leads of 19-0 and 26-8 down the stretch. And Dylan, we'll just jump right into it. There's a lot of variables at play whenever a team loses a game. It's never usually one thing. And for the Giants yesterday, it wasn't just one thing. There was a myriad of factors that contributed to this loss. But I think one thing I think everyone can agree on is that defensive coordinator Shane Bowen, his play calling down the stretch was criminal. It was horrible. Dylan, have you ever in your life seen prevent defense ever work?
No. Okay, listen, if you want to talk about having to do it in like a Hail Mary situation, I could see the reasoning behind it. I'm not a fan of it, but yeah, that's fine. But in that situation, and you're running prevent with 3 pass rushers, it just makes absolutely zero sense. And the other part of it too is the fact that Broncos only needed a field goal to win the game. That's the thing that kills me is they only had to go a certain amount for their kicker to be in range to end it. And yet you decide to go out and potentially just absolutely screw it up in that sense. And it ultimately led to the demise of it. And honestly, you know what? I'll take it a step further too. I think just the game plan in a whole during that whole fourth quarter was abysmal. The fact that you weren't able to create enough pressure on Bo Nix throughout that entire span in that quarter, it really, really hampered it because you obviously know that Sean Payton is a guy that really does a good job of excelling in the short intermediate routes. He's done very well with Drew Brees, obviously, in the past. And now you look at Bo Nix, he's repeating the same thing there. And so when you're not generating enough pressure and it's a vanilla 4-look pass rush there, that just makes it so much tougher for you to even just function as a defense. And it creates all this additional pressure on the secondary unit, which has been struggling. So it was a bad, horrible, horrific, whatever adjective you want to use. It was awful. It was awful.
And especially with the pass rushers you have, you got Brian Burns, you got Kayvon Thibodeau, you got Dexter Lawrence, you got Abdul Carter. You have a phenomenal – Brian Burns has 9 sacks this year. You have a phenomenal pass rush, and we saw Burns after the game walking the tunnel. Dylan, me and you discussed this after the game yesterday. He was livid. Understandably so, dropping 8 in coverage. And this isn't the first time Shane Bowen has done this either. He did it back in Dallas, back in week 2. When that cost the Giants that game. They're up 37-34 with just seconds remaining on the clock. Shane Bowen calls for prevent defense. Cowboys get in field goal range. What happens? They kick a field goal, tie the game, win in overtime. And the prevent for the Giants yesterday wasn't even just on that final drive. It started when they were up 26-8. And the Giants went to prevent. The Broncos went on a long drive and scored their first touchdown. Not their first touchdown, but after 26-8, that rally they had, that was their unanswered points there. That gave them life in the fourth quarter. And once you give any team, especially a good team, you give them life at home, you're in trouble. And that's what happened yesterday. And we saw just the situation. Just I'm at a point now with Shane Bowen. It's like he's in the second year with the Giants. I want to give him some grace, but with the pieces that he has defensively at all 3 levels and the additions they made in free agency. Now we saw 2 of them, Javon Howard and Paulson Debo, both get hurt in the second half yesterday. But they've been there the whole season. They haven't played that well. This defense should be at least a top 15 defense in the NFL with the pieces they have, right? I'm not crazy for thinking that.
No, not at all.
Yeah, they're toward the bottom.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I said coming into this season was, okay, this Giants defense should be legit. You look at that front 4, especially with adding Abdul Carter into the mix, you should be an elite defense in every aspect. I mean, the front 4 is honestly – on paper, statistically speaking, they are one of the best in the NFL. And yet you are still continuing to find a way to put yourself in a position where you're losing games and it's coming down to the defense and they need a stop and they're not getting it. And that's not even necessarily a knock on the defensive players, but honestly, the defensive coordinator. And, I think, yes, I'm obviously all for giving head coaches and defensive coordinators or offensive coordinators grace in that sense. But if you continue to make those mistakes every single time, I mean, it's the definition of insanity. At some point, when do you expect that you're actually going to get the necessary change in order to take the next step? So I think that's why it was just so frustrating for me, because we've seen this constantly where we have the players in place to be able to function, and yet it's not getting done.
No. And for as much, too, as we want to blame the defense yesterday for the collapse because they gave 33 points in the quarter is horrendous. We know that. There was a problem offensively down the stretch. And look, I know New York Giants fans don't want to have to hear this, but Jackson Dart did not play, particularly in the fourth quarter, did not play well yesterday. He went 15 for 33 overall, it's less than 50% completion percentage. And he had 3 delayed games. That interception he threw was horrendous. Now, I know he was getting hit as he threw, but it was a horrendous interception. Dylan, when he threw it in real time, I thought that he legitimately thought that that Strnad was his player, his receiver. I legitimately thought that in real time. That's how bad it looked. And then not only that, Dylan, but there were multiple other passes he threw that should have been picked off, where multiple Broncos defenders were in the area, but they either collided with one another, the ball dropped, whatever else. He didn't play well on the stretch. And I know he had that rushing touchdown late in the game, but they got a big pass interference call to get there. It wasn't like the Giants drove down the field, right? And they got also the call from Sean Payton, berating the referees down to the 2-yard line. So, right, so to me, I know he had 4 touchdowns, and he's a rookie. It was his 4th start. I understand. I think he's going to be a very good quarterback. I think he'd be a great quarterback in this league. I think he could very well be the answer long-term for the Giants. My issue is with everybody already anointing him as the savior of the New York Giants. And we don't know that yet. He's still a rookie.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the mistakes that you saw yesterday were due to the fact that he is a rookie. That interception that came late in the fourth quarter, that's a situation where he tried to play the hero ball and it didn't work out. Obviously, Vance Joseph, credit to him for actually understanding that, you could apply pressure and get a good outcome there and not have to play prevent, unlike some other defensive coordinators. Yeah. But he ends up putting 7 on the line there and obviously drops back 1. But in those cases, you have to realize you're hot in that situation. You got to get the ball out of your hands as quick as you can, because the pressure's coming, especially against a Broncos defense that has done so good of a job being able to get after the quarterback this year. You have to be able to understand that scenario does not allow for you to stay in the pocket and try to complete a pass downfield. And I think that's just one of those cases where, eventually he's going a very good quarterback. He has all the tools to do it. And I mean, he's shown signs already too this season. But on top of that too, there was just a little things like that. And then, I mean, you can also say this too. He missed a couple of those deep balls downfield that, I mean, it could have potentially iced the game. Am I wrong for saying that? Because we remember the one to Jalen Hyatt where it was right there. And if it was just a little bit shorter, it could have potentially iced it. They would have been going home with the victory.
It's a touchdown.
Yeah, it's a touchdown. And unfortunately, he misses them there. But in overall, I mean, as a rookie, that's what I expect. You look at Josh Allen. In his first season as the starter for the Buffalo Bills, it wasn't pretty.
Lots of mistakes.
And everyone thought that he was going to be potentially a bust after that. Everyone jumped the gun on it, and now look at him. I mean, he's one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback, depending on how your viewpoints are about Patrick Mahomes and stuff. But I mean, it's just going to take time. And again, when you're going up against a Denver Broncos defense that has been phenomenal all around this season, I'm not surprised that it happened like that, but it's just something that he's going to have to learn in the future.
Yeah, and the thing is too, the Giants have been looking for a franchise quarterback for, I guess I say since Eli Manning, it was just Daniel Jones. Was the only one. I mean, look, he's only now in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to at the same time, you Giants fans are just starving for it because they made the playoffs twice the last 13 years, right? So they're just starving for an answer, and I hope and I do think Jackson Dart will be the answer. I do think he will. But again, my whole thing is we can't go anointing him before we see it because he's got to make those. He's got to be able to make those crunch time plays. He played very well in the first 3 quarters yesterday, not so well in the fourth. And again, he's on the road in a very tough environment against a very tough defense. Denver's a tough defense, and I think those plays for him will come as he matures and becomes more of an experienced quarterback. So it's actually kind of a good thing this happened to him. This way he can build on it going forward. But we have to see him actually take this and learn from it and build on it as he progresses. And if he can do that, then yeah, he's got it. But until he does that, I still can't say for sure he's the 100% solution going forward. And he's also not the only rookie, Dylan, that the Giants drafted this year in the first round. It was also Abdul Carter. And Abdul Carter, from the standpoint of like when you watch him, you're seeing him get in on the action. You're seeing him get into the backfield. You're seeing him put pressure on the opposing quarterbacks. And the stats also support this. Right? He's got 8 quarterback hits this year. He's getting in the backfield. He's getting hurries. But he has a half of a sack. Now, he did have one yesterday, but it was actually wiped out by an offensive penalty on Denver, unfortunately for Carter. But he has a half of a sack this year. Dylan, should we be concerned about Abdul Carter, or do you think it's just a situation where the sacks will eventually come?
I'm not really concerned. I think you kind of nailed it on the head. You see him on the tape getting after the quarterback, and that's something that honestly most rookies can't necessarily claim. Like it's something that is tough to be able to do, especially when you're transitioning from college to the NFL game. It can be very tough in that sense. However, I do think that eventually the sacks will come. I look at it from, the standpoint of the Cleveland Browns. You have an elite pass rusher like Myles Garrett on one side. You don't necessarily need another elite pass rusher in order to generate pressure. You look at Brian Burns right now, obviously leading the league in sacks. He's got 9 this year. He's done a terrific job of that. And I think right now, as a rookie, it makes sense that his role is more of taking away pressure from Brian Burns in that sense and not necessarily having all the attention being directed onto him. And, if you look at the stats too for him, he's 12th in total pressures, 8th in quarterback hurries. Like he's getting the job done in that sense. But on top of that, like it eventually will come around to the point where he will start to finish it. And I think obviously, it's been only 7 games so far. It's tough to evaluate all of that. But in the end, I still think he's a phenomenal player. I loved him coming out of college. I thought he was probably the number 1 player in last year's draft class. But eventually, time will tell with him, and I think that we will be looking at someone that could potentially be a typical 10-sack guy.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think remember he was a generational talent compared to Micah Parsons coming out of Penn State. So I do agree. My only thing with the Giants, I don't want to say to concern, my only, I guess, pushback on the selection of Carter was they didn't need an edge rusher when you already had Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. There were so many other needs the Giants had. They could have traded down for number 3 and maybe gotten a Tetairoa McMillan, a wide receiver, which we saw yesterday and throughout the season. They need a wide receiver. Even when Malik Neighbors was healthy, they still need another wide receiver. Yeah. And they could have gotten another offensive lineman, right? Maybe you could have drafted a Will Campbell to put on the other side of the line and tackle alongside of Andrew Thomas. They could have drafted maybe trade down and gotten a guard. They could have. There's a lot of things they could have done. Maybe a defensive back. We see how much their secondary struggled yesterday. That's one thing. The only thing I have in mind about Carter. Did the Giants really need him?
No, and that's the thing too. It's tough when you're in that situation where I feel like there was so many, in my opinion, he was light years ahead most of the other guys. Obviously, Travis Hunter and Cam Ward were probably the 2 other guys that were kind of in the same boat as him. Yep. But in terms of that, it's tough because, yeah, obviously, I think they did the correct thing in selecting him with the number third pick. But on top of that, too, you also could have gained back some of the value because you knew when you were making that selection that you were going to have to trade back up into the first round to select Jackson Dart. Like
Right.
that was already in your head. So for me, and I look at teams like Carolina, they desperately needed a pass rusher, and I'm
Yep.
sure that they could have benefited a ton from getting a guy like Abdul Carter. But if they went and tried to go make that trade, you could have gained back that draft capital. And then on top of that, you're not necessarily looking at it from a best player available standpoint. You're now looking, okay, what needs can we fill?
Right.
And for me, I think it was just frustrating to see that, okay, yeah, obviously you got the best player. You did that. That was good. But now you're going to have to be able to fill out these other needs for the future to come. And obviously there was many other players then in that 8 to 10 range where they could have potentially traded down to that could have been impact players.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the whole discussion or the whole debate with need versus BPA, best player available.
Mhm.
And it depends on the team, but I think in the shape the Giants were in, they needed to fill, in my opinion, some other needs more than edge rusher because you have two young guys there in Burns and Thibodeau. You just signed Burns to a 5-year deal last year, the sign trade with Carolina. You exercise Thibodeau's 50-year option. Now, maybe again in a couple of years down the line, I'm going to be saying, "Oh, thank God the Giants took Abdul Carter." That could very well happen, but there, as almost any team's drafting, there's ways to scrutinize every single scenario. So hopefully Carter does come through with some sacks in the second half of the season. Like you said, I think the sacks will come eventually for him.
Yeah.
But going now into Philly, Dylan, I'm concerned about the mental state of the Giants here because now you just blew out Philly last week, 34-17 in week 6, and that Thursday night game. This game now is in Philadelphia. You don't think the Eagles looking for revenge here? I mean, they just beat the Vikings, and I think, and I'm not sure if you agree, Dylan, might have been a must-win game for the Eagles based on the way they had played the previous 2 weeks. Right? They
100%.
needed to win that game based on all the media
Mhm.
speculation, everything else, with AJ Brown, all that.
Yeah.
Now you got to go to Philly. So Jackson Dart's like he goes like it's not like you go from Denver now to Philly. It's such a tough matchup, and they're 2-5. I have a hard time seeing them win this game.
Yeah, and obviously I never like to rule out the possibility of them winning.
Mhm.
It's going to be very tough, and obviously it's unlikely that they could potentially win. But I'm more concerned about with how the defense played in that last game, and especially in the fourth quarter. This is going to be a completely different team than what you saw in previous weeks. Like
Yeah,
Jalen Hurts has started to figure it out on the offensive side of the ball. And that's a huge thing for the Eagles moving forward because that was the number one thing that was kind of everyone was like, oh, like, I don't know, are they going to be able to repeat and stuff? But now Jalen Hurts is back. He's getting his weapons utilized. Obviously, the defense is still a little skeptical on certain ends there. But I do think that, especially with, again, the fourth quarter being how it played out and what type of play calling kind of went down in that scenario, it's going to be pretty sketchy going into a big time game. And then on top of that, too, it's also very hard to defeat a division rival twice in 1 year.
yeah,
As someone who watches the Browns and sees it, for some reason, we like to beat the Steelers once every year. I don't know why, but most of the time, on paper, we shouldn't be beating them. But
yeah.
again, it happens. And I look at it from that standpoint. You got the one win already, and now you're going to have to try to repeat. It's going to be very tough, especially again, Jalen Hurts has been doing a good job of being able to generate the offense that they need in order to win ball games. And again, you're going to have to be able to find a way to basically throw out that game plan that you had against the Broncos and install one that can actually work.
And not only that, though, but now you're looking at Javon Holland and Paulson Adebo both potentially being out for this game. They both got hurt against the Broncos. That's two very critical pieces of your secondary. And we just saw Drew Phillips just get burned over and over again against Denver. And that last play, the 29-yard strike we saw from Bo Nix to Marvin Mims, where he didn't, and again, that was the prevent defense there, but still, Drew Phillips was in the area and he didn't even react to that play. He didn't even react. And he was so late getting over there. So, and he got a big penalty. He's been penalized 7 times this year already. The Giants secondary Cordell Flott has played very well. I like also how Dane Belton has been playing, the backup safety who actually replaced Javon Holland yesterday. And Belton's been getting some time in different packages they've had, and he actually had a big forced fumble against the Eagles week 6. But I worry about the secondary now with those two, with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, not to mention Dallas Goedert as well. I worry about the Giants secondary here.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think the secondary, we've preached it already to the choir. The front four has been phenomenal, but the secondary has been underperforming. And now going into this game, it's going to be very crucial for them to step up, especially with some of the injuries is starting to pile up there. Mm-hmm. It's going to be very tough to be able to defend A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. And then on top of that, too, you have, Saquon Barkley, who's one of the best running backs in the league, obviously not looking as well as he did last year, but still a very, very good running back in that sense. But it's going to be a challenge that it's an internal look, in my opinion, where you have to be able to understand that wasn't working in previous weeks and you have to flip the script.
Yeah. And speaking of weeks, Dylan, have you seen the Giants' schedule for the rest of the season here?
Yeah.
You ready? At Philly, San Francisco, at Chicago, Green Bay, at Detroit, at New England, which is suddenly a very tough game now. Washington, Minnesota, at Vegas, whatever, and then home against Dallas end of the season. Look at that schedule is crazy. It is, which leads me into the next, and our final topic here is the trade deadline discussion. The Giants are in a very, very strange spot because I do think they're in a position where they should be thinking of adding players. Like they need a wide receiver. They got to get a receiver for Jackson Dart. And that's the reason why I want to defend Dart a little bit from yesterday, because when Malik Neighbors out, Darius Slayton was out. It was basically Wan'Dale Robinson and a bunch of nobodies. He has no receivers at all. They got to get a receiver. But they also are in a spot where they might have to sell some players off because they're 2-5 right now. You're looking at, this schedule – I find it hard to see them going any better than 5-12, maybe based on that schedule. And you might even think of, based on our discussion about Carter before, do you trade Kayvon Thibodeau? Because they're not paying 3 edge rushers. They've already paid Burns. They're probably going to pay Carter at some point. Thibodeau has 1 year left on his deal here because the Giants exercised the 5th year of his contract. He's a trade candidate, I think, in my opinion. What do you think? Who's some candidate the Giants could potentially trade here?
I 100% think that KT is on the trade block at this point. The fact that he wasn't moved after the selection of Abdul Carter kind of blows my mind. Yeah. I get it to an extent. Obviously, it's hard to find the trade partner and stuff, and you got to see how everything pans out. But at the same time, too, you spent a 3rd overall pick on Abdul Carter. You expect him to have an impact, and obviously, you don't want to. You really don't want to have to extend Kayvon Thibodeau at that point because you drafted Carter for a reason. You want him to step up into that role, and you paid Brian Burns. So I definitely think that he should be dealt. And, obviously he's a very solid player. He's done a pretty good job there throughout his time. And I think that he could be someone that could be an impact player on a playoff team. One team that I have in mind that could honestly answer both questions is the Indianapolis Colts, because if you look at their current roster, they need a pass rusher. They've dealt with some stuff going on there on that front four. But on top of that, too, they have a slew of wide receivers that, at this point, please just forfeit one of them for any team at this point, And, obviously, you're probably not going to get like Michael Pittman or anything like that because he's the number one, and obviously they're still in contention for the playoffs and all of that. But there's guys.
That's a good team, man. That's a good team.
It's a very good team. But I look at a guy like Adonai Mitchell. He's potentially one that they could move off of, and obviously, there's been some concerns for how he's been playing so far in these past 2 years. But at the flip side, like you got to take a risk and see if maybe you can hit on that potential. And then on top of that, too, there's a guy like Alex Pierce on that
Yeah,
roster. So I think like Indianapolis, like that's the number one team that I would be calling in that sense.
Yeah, I also think another team to watch is San Francisco because you
Yes.
got they both out for the year now. That's a possibility. There's I think a lot of teams that I think would be interested in a Kayvon Thibodeau because remember just 2 years ago he had 11 and a half sacks and he was a former first round pick as well, a top 5 pick.
Yep.
Thibodeau is very talented and he's been good this year. He hasn't been great, but he's been good. So I do think there would be interest in him between now and the trade deadline. The Giants also might be able to get a day 2 pick out of him in a deal. I think it's very possible to get a day 2 pick. If not likely, that's what they would get. And then you have obviously Russell Wilson will be on the trade block. I think we all know that. Maybe a Devin Singletary at running back. Now these are guys you probably won't get much in return for, but it's something, right? You can get a day 3 pick. It's something. So
yeah, no, and like, go ahead.
No.
You take over. Basically, what I was going to say is when you're moving up from that draft pick that you did in last year's draft, you got to have to find a way to accumulate more picks. And especially when you're in this rare situation where you're kind of a buyer, you're kind of a seller, you need to find a way to build up the rest of the roster in that sense. And if you're not moving off of some of these guys, like you mentioned, a Devin Singletary or a Russell Wilson, those things matter because you could potentially hit on one of those day 3 picks or 2 pick that you end up getting in those. And I mean, it's better to plan for the future, especially when we were just talking about how rough the schedule looks going ahead. Like I would much rather just see that go that way instead of just have them lingering on the roster at that point.
And you know what, Dylan? Also, the Giants don't have a 3rd round pick this year either because they traded it in the Dart deal last year. So, like, even if you want to go out and get a wide receiver like a Jacoby Myers or something like that, do you really want to trade a 2nd round pick for Jacoby Myers? I'm not sure you want to do that. No. So that's why it's important to get as much draft capital as possible. That way you can stockpile some of those picks and maybe either hit on one of them in a late round flyer or you include them in a package to move up in the draft at some point. It's something you can do. Those picks, they do matter. Like, they're not like, incredibly valuable picks, but they do matter, and you see them being moved in trades all the time. So that's something I think that the Giants should keep an eye on here on the church as well.
Yeah, and when we go more into like the wide receiver talk as well, I think you hit it right on the head too. You could use that for a potential trade to get the wide receiver because I'm looking at a team like Miami right now after losing to the Cleveland Browns, Jalen Waddle. Like, you are in the prime spot to be able to trade for a guy like him. Am I wrong for saying that? Because
no, you're right. He's young, and I would trade a 2nd rounder for him. Waddle, I would.
And that's the thing, because where it's going to be that pick? It's most likely going to be a wide receiver in the first 2 rounds or something like that. Probably maybe in the 3rd round, who knows? But you're already going to use that pick to try to get that player in that position there. So why not just go out and get someone that is established? He's proven himself consistently that, when he's playing, obviously he's dealt with injuries and stuff.
Yeah.
He's someone that could really be beneficial, especially with his speed and how well that Miami has used him. I think it's very similar in a way that Brian Daboll could do it. You could put him outside, makes it a lot easier for Dart, especially with Malik Neighbors out.
Yes. And when Neighbors comes back next year as well. That's a dynamic duo.
Exactly.
Well, everyone, that's the first edition of the New York Giants Roundtable podcast. Again, wish it could have been under better circumstances, which would have been a Giants win that Dylan and I were discussing here, but it wasn't. We'll be back next week to talk about the Giants and Eagles, what happens there, and maybe more trade deadline talk. Hopefully not more talk about firing coaches, but we'll see what happens between now and then. For Matthew Schmidt, he is Dylan Feltovich. This is the Giants Roundtable podcast. See you next time.